Thanks for joining us this hour. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up. Jamaicans warned to stock up on essentials ahead of Hurricane Beryl's imminent arrival. The aftermath of a stampede at a religious festival in India where 121 people died. Plus, death toll from a 3-story building collapse in Egypt rises to 14. The World Today starts now. Hurricane Beryl will for sure make a landing in Jamaica as it tears through the Caribbean. Earlier today, Prime Minister Andrew Holness made a nationwide appeal for people living in low-lying areas or those living near the coast to evacuate to shelters. He also encouraged people to stock up on supplies, reminding Jamaicans the hurricane is one of the effects of climate change. Jamaica's carbon emissions are not enough to impact the environment, but he says the Caribbean is one of the regions bearing its brunt. Emergency services will be on standby to assist where possible after the hurricane is past. Information Minister Dana Morris-Dixon, also speaking earlier, said the government has put everything in place to deal with a hurricane of this strength. She says Jamaica has 2 buffers, a catastrophe bond and a disaster fund that help pay for rebuilding following a natural disaster like a hurricane. In the meantime, shelters are stocking up, homes are being safeguarded, and boats have been pulled from water. The capital, Kingston, cars have been queuing up for fuel in their cars and also in extra containers. Electricity and water services are likely to be shut off as a precaution to prevent fires and damage to equipment, according to the government. As we track Hurricane Beryl's movement across the Caribbean, at least 7 people have been killed in Grenada, Venezuela, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The hurricane became the first Category 5 storm to ever be recorded in the Atlantic in June. And even though it has weakened a little bit now, it's still expected to be a major hurricane as it passes through Jamaica. Grenada Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell has described the situation in his country as Armageddon-like and that they would have to rebuild from the ground up. Officials say 98% of the buildings on the islands of Carriacou and Petite Martinique have either been damaged or destroyed, including Carriacou's main health facility, the Princess Royal Hospital, and its airport and marinas. He says there's no power, there's an almost complete destruction of homes and buildings, and power lines are still down in some areas. Venezuela was not directly hit by Beryl, but it has suffered as a result of heavy rain triggered by the storm. President Nicolas Maduro says at least 3 people were killed when a river in the northeastern state of Sucre overflowed. He has sent a delegation to inspect the damage. The situation in Union Island is one of almost complete devastation. One resident says there are hardly any buildings left standing. Houses are flattened, roads are blocked, electricity poles are down in the streets. Virtually every building on the island, which is just off St. Vincent and the Grenadines, has been razed or badly damaged. Here in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital, it's been raining heavily, leaving many residents stranded to get into their offices and places of business. Many roads across the state were also flooded because of the traffic.
The rains are here. Major parts of Lagos is affected by the downpour. From mainland to Lagos Island, nowhere is spared. Iyanoworo Inwards Third Mainland Bridge is completely taken over by flood. Toluwashe area of Bega, Oworoshoki residential area is also submerged. Ikotu Road is not left out. Tricycle operators are trying to make their way through the water. Egbeda Akunwajo Road is overflowing. Some motorists struggle to drive through the flood. Ogba leading to Wemco Road is not so bad, but as a result of the rainfall, traffic is already building in some parts like Agege, Inward Ogba, and it's congested. While residents of the state are appealing to the government to clear the drainage more often to avoid flood disaster, there's also the responsibility of managing waste better.
Just to recap our major story today, which is tracking Hurricane Beryl's movement as it crosses the Caribbean. It's already gone through Grenada, the islands of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The hurricane became the first Category 5 storm to ever be recorded in the Atlantic in June. And even though it has weakened a little bit, it's still expected to make be a major hurricane as it passes through Jamaica. Let's bring in now climate change experts, Dr. John Osonwa, who joins us from our Abuja studio to discuss this a little further, as well as the weather conditions here in Lagos and in Abuja, where it's also been raining heavily. Dr. Osonwa, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's begin with a hurricane in the Caribbean, and a bit earlier in the year to be recording such incidents, isn't it?
Oh, yes. You would have to go back about 100 years to see a hurricane developing so early in the hurricane season. Typically the hurricane season begins on June 1st and ends around November 30th. The last time, the previous record holder was Hurricane Emily, and that one happened on July 16th, 2005. So this is a bit of a surprise, and it fits into the trend of what we're seeing. Because of climate change, we are seeing frequent hurricanes, more severe hurricanes, and in a lot of instances, they are developing much earlier in the hurricane season.
Right, and the Hurricane Beryl is said to be a Category 5 storm. It's causing much harm. At least 5 people have died. Venezuela recording 3 deaths as well. Residents on Union Island have been rendered homeless as a result of this hurricane. Is this a taste of what future hurricanes could look like this year?
I'm afraid so, because you have to remember that the reason we have hurricanes in the first place is because of exceptionally high ocean temperature, sea level temperature. When it rises, it picks up a lot of moisture. It interferes with wind, trade winds, and begins to rev up to become a hurricane. So to the extent that we are seeing global warming, increased temperatures, record-setting heat waves, so you see that the likelihood is that we're going to have more hurricanes in this region. The other thing I want to point out, in an average hurricane season, you have about 10 to 14 events, cyclones, hurricanes, severe storms. But in 2020, we had a record 30 severe events. So when you look at the trend we're seeing, clearly there's an increase, and it's a worrying trend for all of us.
Coming now to Lagos now, all day today, it's rained, it's also poured. There have been flash floods recorded in many areas of the state, although we know this is mainly due to drainage. But then the intensity of the rain, a building even collapsed sometime yesterday. And I know that in Abuja as well, it's been raining, and there have also been, the resultant effects being, building collapses as well, flash floods. The intensity of the rains have slightly changed, I'm assuming. Can we also attribute that to climate change?
Yes, there's a growing body of evidence suggesting that because of climate change, we are seeing a rapid increase in the frequency and the severity of these severe events. And the issue of flooding is related to Arctic ice melting. Because of increasing temperatures, we are seeing a rapid meltdown of the Arctic Circle. And all that water feeds all the major oceans of the world. It feeds the Barents Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, which affects us here, Pacific. So when you have that excess water coming into the ocean. It is raising the sea level in a lot of the coastal cities. A recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a very high-level UN body that oversees these issues, came up with a conclusion that a lot of the cities, over 50 cities, will be affected by the year 2100. 2100. But more particularly, by the year 2050, at the halfway point, you're going to see dozens of cities, including our very own Lagos here, London, New Orleans, all those coastal cities that are very on the lower level when you look at where they are placed on the globe. Some of them are not above a meter high from the sea level. So those cities are going to suffer severe flooding. I'm particularly troubled because Lagos, in the recent past, we have been reclaiming a lot of ocean land for building projects. That could have some severe consequences down the road. As the ocean is rising, it makes it difficult for the water to evacuate properly. So you have flooding. Water is backing up because the ocean is higher than it used to be.
What could help to prevent this from happening? Because I know that the developers will not be stopping anytime soon, not even with the predictions that you and other experts have made. So how can they mitigate this?
Well, there are a number of ways. Sometimes a lot of these people are building on floodplains. Sometimes they are building dangerously close to ocean surges and where the ocean has risen. So what we need to do, we need to have stringent building codes. We need to have strict enforcement. We also need to adapt. That's what we talk in climate change lingo. We talk about adaptation. If you know that you're now living in an area that is prone to flooding and sea level surges, you need to adapt the way you build. In the US, we build on stilts. These are raised platforms. You can extend the living floor about 20 feet above sea level. So even if you have a flood event, it doesn't enter into the areas where people live. We also can build barriers. I remember living a place called New Bedford in Massachusetts about 30 years ago. They had a barrier, what they call a levee. It's about 10 feet across, very high. So when the ocean rises, there's a surge, it doesn't affect residents. So those kinds of adaptation mechanisms must be in place. But most importantly, if people live in flood-prone areas, all those people living in the Kogi axis, Benue axis, next to the river, you've been flooded 5 times in the last 10 years, you need to move. That is a clear indication that that area is not habitable. People need to be evacuated.
But when you talk about movement, people have to consider means of livelihood. As they move, they can't just move anywhere. And then you also need to consider housing, in the country, which is also a major problem. Sorry, not a small problem, but a major problem for many in Nigeria at present. Where to live, the cost of housing, which has gone up, the availability of housing. Those are all problems, that people still have to deal with, whether or not there are climate issues.
Yeah, I think government has a role to play because clearly we have a housing deficit in the country and people are suffering. But we also need to look at cultural stubbornness. Some people don't want to move because they're acclimatized to a particular area. They do some farming, fishing, whatever. So even when their lives are at risk, they refuse to move. So those people, we need to encourage them. Government needs to intervene because ultimately it is the business of government to safeguard lives and maintain the welfare of the citizenry. So government has a role to play. But people also need to adhere to instructions and warnings. I know every year NIMET comes up with warnings, areas that will be flooded. A lot of people, they go back. I always give an anecdote about this. I remember in the floods of 2012, I happened to be passing through Kogi, and I could see people sitting in front of a house playing draft. And you could see above their heads the watermark where the flood had been just a week ago. You could see it clearly. But they were just there oblivious to the dangers, playing their draft, laughing. And I just shook my head. I said, the problem is deeper than we think. So we need to have a confluence of interest, confluence of activity to deal with this issue. But the one thing I want to give is the flood issue is not going to go away anytime soon because there are global climate change factors that are at work. And those things cannot be addressed in an instant. Arctic ice is melting. Over half of that huge expanse of ice, the size of Africa, has melted. It has gone into our oceans, and it has created a sea level rise that we cannot cope with business as usual strategies and mindset.
Maybe this is a perfect time to also sound the warning on food security, because with all of that water coming in, it will be hard to get to the farmlands and to harvest or plant anything, right?
Yes, climate change, we just looked at that issue at a conference 2 weeks ago. Climate change is a major threat to food security because when you look at what it does to the environment, you have desertification in the northern part of Nigeria, you have drought, you have water scarcity. Lake Chad has shrunk by about 90% in the last 30 years, pushing out 30 million people. People in that region, they are traditionally pastoral herdsmen. There's no water, there is no grass, there's no means of livelihood, so they are forced to come down. Then when you come into the agricultural sector, we have low yields, we have pests and diseases, vectors that are proliferating because the climate is changing rapidly. So and of course you have flooding. You plant at the time you want to harvest, the floods will come in and sweep everything away. So it is a major threat to food security, climate change. And that's something we need to begin to look at deeply.
Dr. John Osonwa, thank you again for reminding us the importance of this and how we should be preparing for the future.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
It's also been a day of grief and mourning for much of India, coming to terms with the deaths of at least 121 people at a religious event in Uttar Pradesh. The incident took place during a satsang, a Hindu festival organized by a self-styled preacher called Bole Baba. Police said the massive overcrowding at the venue in Hathras district led to Tuesday's stampede. They've registered a case against the event's main organizers. It's one of the worst such tragedies for many years in India, where accidents involving large crowds are often blamed on lax safety measures and crowd management. Earlier today, a large number of policemen were present as politicians visited the site to find out how the tragedy unfolded. Dozens of workers were busy removing the sprawling tent from event venue, about 500 meters from the main road, to colorful arches bearing the name and photograph of the self-styled guru stood at the entrance and exit. According to the first information report lodged by the police, authorities had given permission for 80,000 people to gather for the event, but around 250,000 people turned up to attend it. Coming up after the break on The World Today. Politicians make a final stretch ahead of the UK's general election on July 4. Stay with us. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has made a last-ditch effort to rally the Conservative faithful as the UK is on the cusp of a pivotal general election set to take place tomorrow, July 4. During a campaign that has lasted 6 weeks, the ruling Conservatives have failed to shake off the taint of mismanagement and political chaos that has characterized its 14 years in power. Labour has been consistently ahead in most opinion polls, but victory is not just a two-horse race. The Liberal Democrats and the newly formed Reform UK are also vying for votes. Our correspondent, Juliana Olainka, has more.
After a tense 6-week battle, the UK general election campaign has reached its final day. In just a few hours' time, polling stations across the country will open, leaving the fate of the future of Britain in the hands of voters. The key battlegrounds have remained persistent: the NHS, immigration and the elevated cost of living. Opposition parties have successfully accused the Conservatives of mismanaging the country for the past 14 years. A campaign full of missteps and errors have contributed to a sense of dissatisfaction and disappointment among so-called traditional Tory voters.
Look, it's going to be a very difficult general election. That is something that I recognise and I accept. I've been on the doors, knocking on doors, talking with local people across the southeast region, including London as well, not too far from here in Westminster. It's going to be tough, but I think this should be an opportunity for the Conservative Party to reflect on what it did well and how that went well with the public, and what it did not quite go quite as well as it would have planned. But it's going to be very difficult next couple of weeks for the Conservative Party.
According to the polls, Labour is heading for the biggest general election landslide in history. But poor treatment of veteran MP Diane Abbott, a delay over calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and Sir Keir Starmer's handling of gender identity issues has left some Brits undecided about the party.
Our message to people is that we need a country. We want to rebuild this country, in particular our economy. Is the high cost of living crisis that have put many people in the benefit zone. So if we're able to rebuild the economy of this country, then things will get better, not for a few, but for all of us.
The campaign has been tough and bruising, and political pundits anticipate a significant share of the vote to be captured by Nigel Farage's Reform Party and the previously dormant Liberal Democrats.
There may be a day or so left for the Conservative government to try and convince undecided voters, but to be honest, the polls have been consistent for the past 6 weeks. Come Friday morning, the political landscape of Britain is going to change. And what can we expect from a Labour government? There are concerns about the economy. We're barely limping our way out of a recession. What is these immigration plans? Clearly, there will be no plane taking off to Rwanda. And women, are we going to be safe in public spaces? It has been a pretty decent campaign period for Sir Keir Starmer, but come Monday morning, the honeymoon period is likely to be over. Juliana Olayinka reporting for Channels TV News in Westminster.
I want to bring in a lecturer at the School of Humanities, York St. John University in the UK, Tokunbo Olorundami. He joins us from Abuja here in Nigeria. Tokunbo, thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm just wondering, are you as undecided as many voters in the UK? Tokunbo, can you hear me? We're already talking about, the elections coming up tomorrow in the UK, and Juliana mentioned undecided voters who still have to make up their minds about the elections, about who to be voting tomorrow, as the political landscape is set to change by Friday morning. Are you amongst those who are still undecided? We do seem to be having problems with Tokunbo's connection there. We'll try to reconnect with him to have this conversation. In the meantime, electoral matters still ongoing in the United States, still reeling from the aftermath of Thursday's presidential debates. So White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre rejected speculation recently that President Joe Biden is suffering from a form of dementia or a degenerative illness. She was responding to questions at the White House referring to Thursday night's debate. She had accepted that the president did not have a great night, but reiterated that his poor performance was largely due to a cold.
First of all, I want to say we understand the concerns. We get it. The president did not have a great night, as you all know, and many of you reached out during the debate. The president had a cold. He had a hoarse voice. You all heard it. That's why you reached out. But I will say this, and the president said this over the past couple of days, certainly right after the debate. He knows how to do the job. And he knows how to do the job, not because he says it, because his record proves it. Because for 3.5 years, almost 4 years, the president's record has been unprecedented, delivering for the American people. Another thing that he said that I would add is he knows right from wrong. He knows how to tell the truth. And again, he knows how to deliver for the American people. As it relates to his medical records, we have been transparent. We have released thorough reports from his medical team every year since he's been in office. That is something that we have been pretty consistent about. As it relates to, something like a cognitive test, to the question that you're asking me about what the speaker, former speaker said. Obviously, she can speak for herself. His team, who has said, the medical team said it is not warranted in this case. We have put forward a thorough, transparent annual report on his health. So they have said that is not warranted. It is not necessary. We're not taking away from what you all saw or what the American people saw. We understand it was a bad night. It is not uncommon for incumbents to have a bad night on their first debate. And we are going to continue to do the work that we have been doing on behalf of the American people. I think the president's record certainly speaks for itself.
Turkish President Recep Erdogan says Ankara and Moscow would continue to strengthen economic ties with the aim of increasing their annual trade turnover to $100 billion. He made the remarks during his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in the Kazakh capital, Astana. President Erdogan stated that currently the volume of trade is $55 billion, adding that the two sides believe they can achieve their goal of doubling that figure. Putin declared that relations between the two countries had been developing consistently despite the complicated global situation. Moscow and Ankara are pursuing major joint projects as planned, adding that there have been no hitches since then. We can revisit the conversation now with the UK elections coming up tomorrow. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's job probably on the line. As Julina earlier reported, the political landscape could change by Friday morning. But let's hear what Tokunbo Olorundami, lecturer at the School of Humanities at St. John University in the UK, what he thinks is here in Nigeria, in the capital, Abuja. Tokunbo, great to have you on the program. After 6 weeks of campaigning, do you think the politicians are ready for tomorrow's polls?
Hello?
Great. Yes, we can hear you, but can you hear us? We've been asking about what you think about the readiness of the politicians
if I got
for tomorrow's polls.
Correctly, yes, I am one of those undecided, and that is mainly because of the general narrative around the economy and the lack of trust for Keir Starmer and the confusion in the Conservative Party. A reform coming up, the Liberal Democrats are also looking so good that perhaps what the Conservatives are doing now is fighting to be the opposition party. So yes, I'm still undecided, and the key reasons for that is that it's quite noisy to understand the economic focus of the different parties and knowing where to rest my vote.
Let's see if we can navigate through the noise, shall we? Labour leader Keir Starmer said earlier today that Labour was on the course for a big victory. This is coming after a new poll suggested Conservatives are on course for a worse defeat than in 1997. The Prime Minister does not agree. He says he's fighting for every vote. Is it okay to say now that this could be one of the toughest elections between the Tories and Labour?
I'm not sure if I heard you quite correctly, but it does sound like you're asking about the Conservatives being accused of voter suppression. And yes, it does appear like that, because coming out to say, "Oh, don't allow Labour to become the largest, party in the parliament, and being careful not to allow that kind of heavyweight going unchecked, and the danger that proceeds for the UK, generally, is a subtle call if they are undecided of the vote, it is a form of voter suppression. The awakening of Boris Johnson and all effort, last-minute effort, to see how to suppress, the votes and last-minute on-the-table deals with some of the reform members, to have crossed over now to the conservative. These factors are clear indications that the candidates are struggling, especially conservative. If they don't do what they need to do within the next few hours, it's going to be a major landslide for Labour.
Well, I'm glad you already addressed the issue of voter suppression, which is what Keir Starmer did mention earlier as well, when he was referring to what Labour had said about them winning the largest majority. But what the question I had asked about him saying that Labour is on course for a big victory. And according to Juliana, most of the polls that have been taken even before this election show that Labour is in the lead and could be taking over a majority of Parliament and as well as the Prime Minister's seat.
Absolutely. There are clear indications already. If the polls are anything to go by, the Labour victory this time around is most likely going to be larger than 1997, when John Major was unseated and Blair came into power. If you recall, the two key events that really turned the table massively then in 1997 was the handing over of Hong Kong to China and the death of Princess Diana. This time around, there are loads of scandals, that has bedeviled the Conservative Party. So we expect that the British people will be unforgiven, especially with the behavior of Boris Johnson during the COVID and the behavior of Rishi Sunak during the Armed Forces Remembrance Day that he walked out on the veterans. And then the betting scandals and the failure of the Brexit deal to bring any form of good to the people. Don't forget that loads of young voters are coming on board now, and they no longer can travel freely to walk around Europe. So they will be going for blood. I am quite optimistic that Labour will win. However, the question now is, will Conservative be the opposition party? However, I cannot answer that question yet.
It is interesting that you're saying that Labour could win when you probably might not even be around to vote tomorrow. So let's talk about, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, his consciousness to the fact that he could be losing his seat tomorrow. And then you already said that you're confident that Labour will win. What would Britain look like under a Labour leadership?
With the Labour victory, the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, that is certain. I'm sure that's a question you asked me, right?
Yes,
it's a bad line. I'm not sure if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yes, that is the question.
Oh, yeah. So it's certainly the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, will be the Prime Minister. However, it is my prediction that he may not stay too long, because within the Labour Party, there are sides, there are those who still belong to the Jeremy Corbyn camp, and that played out in the attempt to stop Diana Abbott from running and things like that. So the party is quite divided. However, hopefully they will get their acts together and not allow what has happened in the Conservative Party over the last 14 years, throwing them within the party and playing the strangest kind of politics that has brought the instability to the UK, political space.
Well, fingers crossed, the best man wins tomorrow and the best party wins as well. Thank you, Tokunbo Olorudami, here in Nigeria's federal capital, Abuja. We're off on another break now. You're welcome. We're off on another break now on The World Today. Still ahead. Supporters have released WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange celebrate his birthday in Sydney, Australia. Stay with us. Welcome back. A military parade marking Independence Day in Belarus and the 80th anniversary of the country's liberation from Nazi occupation was held in Minsk early today. Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Kernin and his deputy Andrei Zuk drove along the lines of troops and greeted military personnel. The procession included 36 parade units as well as servicemen from Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, China, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said that the country's military was capable of preventing any provocation at the state borders. Back here on the continent, despite South Africa's annual consumer price inflation remaining steady at 5.2% in May, with a minimal 0.2% increase in the monthly consumer price index, many South Africans continue to face challenges in making ends meet. Monthly basics have become expensive in the country. Consumers are finding it challenging to navigate these difficult times in shrinking salaries and the rising inflation. Many households resort to credit cards for basic necessities such as groceries. This has become a common practice, creating an ongoing cycle that often leads households into debt. Our South Africa correspondent Innocent Samosa reports.
Some South Africans continue to face significant challenges in making ends meet. My brother, it's difficult. The 10,000 rents I'm getting every month is not enough. All the money pay the bills, and I'm left out of pocket.
Yes, it's difficult for them. To be honest, like we as the youth were financially illiterate, so we don't know how to use the money.
According to the National Credit Regulator's credit market report, South Africans are over $110,000 in debt. This includes home and car loans as well as credit and store cards. South Africa's largest debt management company, Debt Busters, says that as interest rates continue to rise, some South Africans are using 65% of their net income to service debt. Ozemeke Nonso says locals should embrace the spirit of hustling because one salary is simply not enough.
The only thing I have to advise them is those that are connected with some foreigners, they can also emulate them. You understand? They can also work with them because some of them, they like their ability. If you have a friend now who is making money, hustling to make money relax, then because you are in South Africa, it's my country, it's my country. So the only thing I have to give the advice, those that are connected with foreigners or those that have the zeal of hustling, there are many things to do here in this country as a citizen.
So are you saying if we work together, things will be better?
Hallelujah. If we work together, we are helping one another.
The credit world can be shrewd. Annelien van der Poel, COO of Debt Rescue, says understanding consumer rights empowers individuals to navigate debt repayment plans more effectively and protect themselves from unfair practices in the debt recovery process.
Understanding consumer rights empowers individuals in several ways. Firstly, it enables them to make informed decisions about repayment options, ensuring they choose plans that are fair and manageable. It also protects them from harassment and unfair practices by debt collectors, such as misleading statements and illegal threats. They can also identify and dispute unjust charges, and that they have legal recourse if their rights are violated by ensuring that they can address unfair practices effectively. Most importantly, for many consumers, they are just not able to repay the debt they have due to factors beyond their control, such as the cost of living crisis and interest rate increases.
As the cost of living continues to rise, it is vital for consumers to be aware of their rights and the resources available to them. Financial literacy and proper planning can help households manage their finances better and avoid falling into debt trap. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
14 people have been killed, 6 others rescued after a building collapsed in the Shak neighborhood of Assuit Governorate in southern Egypt. Rescue teams have been clearing debris using heavy machinery as locals look for their belongings and the remains of the collapsed structure. The press service said in a statement that the efforts to remove the rubble of a 3-story house collapse in the Shak neighborhood have ended, adding that the engineering committee formed to inspect the collapsed building and neighborhood houses and evacuate the affected ones will continue to work to protect the lives of citizens. The statement also confirmed that efforts to remove rubble, search for the missing and recover bodies lasted for 24 hours. Using 10 ambulances, 5 civil protection vehicles, and land rescue vehicles, in addition to rapid rescue unit vehicles, to help remove the rubble and recover the missing residents. A mom who used taekwondo moves to stop a thief stealing her motorbike said she felt let down by police. 31-year-old Christina wrestled the robber, claiming to be a 12-year-old boy, to the ground at Hatters Way Retail Park in Luton in the UK, but gave up and released him after 10 minutes. She said the police car had passed the scene earlier and only returned after the thief had escaped. Bedfordshire police said it had carried out several lines of inquiry and an investigation was ongoing. Christina had gone to buy a drink from Chawala on Monday, June 24. She said it was just a normal, casual working day. Everyone was having a lunch break. Then, out of the blue, 2 mopeds pulled up, carrying 3 passengers. One of them grabbed her motorbike. And as we end the program, dozens of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's supporters gathered in Sydney today to mark the journalist's 53rd birthday, his first since being released from the UK's Belarus prison. Supporters sang happy birthday, they cheered and they served cake to celebrate. Signs reading happy birthday Julian Assange, hero and truth produces justice can be seen displayed around the demonstration site. According to WikiLeaks, Assange left Belarus prison on June 24 after reaching a plea deal with the US, boarding a plane at London Stansted Airport. Assange pleaded guilty to 1 count of breaching the Espionage Act during a hearing in Saipan, the largest of the Northern Mariana Islands. The hearing was reportedly held in the US Commonwealth due to his proximity to Australia and his own opposition to traveling to the United States.
Well, he has revealed information that various governments didn't want people to know about crimes that their soldiers are doing. Their soldiers are not brave heroes. They're often killing civilians. And many wars are completely pointless. And they just are there to sell weapons. So I think perhaps he's just let us know what's happening, and we should be able to decide what we want our various governments to do. But we can't tell them what to do unless we know what's happening.
Well, for the world, he's been a human being that has no fear to stand up and speak truth to the people, power to the people, and he's suffered incredibly for that, which is an incredible injustice and an incredible wronging. But he's home, he's freed, and the fight still goes on because there's still the next step is to ask for the pardon for what he had to agree to his freedom. So, yeah.
Absolute propaganda.
And that's The World Today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.